Maybe you've stayed late, missed weekends, and sacrificed your health only to watch someone else cruise ahead because they know the right people. If you've ever questioned whether the promise that hard work always pays off is really true, you're not alone. In today's deep dive, we'll uncover why the idea that relentless dedication leads automatically to success might actually be the biggest myth we've ever been sold. Stick with me, because recognizing this truth doesn't have to be discouraging. Instead, it can open your eyes to powerful new strategies for reclaiming control and finally getting the recognition you deserve. Ready to challenge some old beliefs and reshape your future? Then let's jump in. And if you enjoy these thought-provoking conversations, please consider subscribing. Your support helps us create more eye-opening content, helping you and others navigate life with greater clarity and purpose. Hard work is one of the most universally admired values in human society. From the time we first learn to walk, we are immersed in stories and lessons about the moral goodness of labor. Teachers remind us that diligent study will bring success in school. Parents insist that chores will teach us discipline and responsibility. Friends tell us that practicing a skill day and night will eventually translate into recognition. These influences converge into a core belief: if you labor tirelessly, push yourself past the point of exhaustion, and remain loyal to your duties, life will reward you. This creed, repeated from childhood through adolescence and adulthood, appears so self-evident that few people ever question it. Yet despite this unwavering faith in hard work, countless individuals find themselves waking up early, staying late, clocking in 60 hours per week, and still watching others leapfrog them in rank recognition or fortune. They do every task diligently, follow every policy strictly, and maintain a spotless record of conduct, only to observe colleagues who cut corners or spend more time talking than working, climbing the professional ladder faster. The typical reaction is to wonder, what have I done wrong? The assumption is that hard work, honesty, and loyalty must inevitably pay off. But the stark reality hits. While one person sacrifices weekends and family time to finish projects, another is off forging connections with influential people who open doors behind the scenes. What if the question, "What did I do wrong?" is the wrong question to ask in the first place? Perhaps a better question is, what system am I actually supporting, and why is it failing to deliver on its promises, rather than seeing it as an individual mistake, some personal flaw in effort or skill? It might be illuminating to realize that something about the entire structure is off. Nietzsche, the 19th century German philosopher, recognized that entire moral structures can be built to serve the powerful rather than the dutiful. If the structure is designed to elevate those who understand and manipulate power dynamics, and to keep unquestioning laborers at a certain level, then conscientious labor alone becomes insufficient. Understanding this discrepancy between moral labor and tangible reward begins with re-examining the myths we are taught. From childhood onward, you might have been assured that effort always equals outcome. Society, culture, and perhaps even religious teachings have emphasized that virtuous work eventually garners respect and reward, if not now, then someday in the future. This someday can become an elusive promise that keeps people grinding indefinitely, always hoping the boss or a higher authority will notice. Tragically, the moment for recognition does not always come. When promotions are granted to less skilled individuals who happen to align with key players in the organization, or when the largest paychecks end up with those who are adept at self-promotion over tangible achievement, it can feel like personal betrayal. But it isn't necessarily personal at all. It is an outcome of a system that prizes perception and leverage over raw diligence. In such a system, following the rules too strictly can actually be a disadvantage if it means never learning how to negotiate power. Those who cling to the conviction that moral effort alone opens doors are often left with heartbreak instead of a breakthrough. The idea that virtue equates to a guaranteed payoff is deeply woven into social norms. People grow up reading fairy tales where the honest, hard-working character always triumphs over the cunning trickster. We see children's television shows that portray the good character persevering until justice is served. This conditioning attaches a certain nobility to endurance, self-sacrifice, and unwavering dedication. You're taught to keep your head down, respect authority, and never cut corners, trusting that those who follow the straight and narrow path will eventually bask in the spotlight of earned success. In contrast, we also witness something profoundly contradictory. Everyday individuals who embody these qualities, honesty, loyalty, diligence, struggling to meet their basic needs. Nurses in overcrowded hospitals work 12-hour shifts, juggling multiple patients and risking their mental health, yet they earn a fraction of what a social media influencer can make in a single brand deal. Construction workers start at dawn, labor intensively in heat or cold, and then retire with minimal savings. Meanwhile, corporate executives who shuffle paperwork and attend lavish networking events earn salaries large enough to sustain multiple families. That contradiction stings even more when we notice that the system often rewards those who appear to manipulate the rules. The moral laborers, those who put in the actual sweat and demonstrate humility, are frequently the first to be told they are expendable in times of budget cuts or restructuring. This pattern is not accidental. It is how the system is designed. Power dictates outcomes, and the resources of the system, capital networks opportunities, flow more readily to those who hold or can influence this power. Labor in itself is easier to replace, outsource, or automate. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche brought a spotlight to these tendencies long before the modern workplace or the digital influencer economy existed. He identified that societies develop moral codes that often serve the interests of those at the helm. Moreover, the code exalts self-denial, compliance, and humility, especially among those who have less control over resources. This slave morality, as Nietzsche famously called it, is not just about being kind or good-hearted. It's an entire worldview that glorifies suffering and submission as virtues in and of themselves. In this worldview, the people who follow rules, who show up early, who spend weekends volunteering for extra tasks, are considered moral in the sense that they uphold the communal need. They might even view themselves as morally superior to those who strategize, network, or manipulate. Yet ironically, these same morally superior individuals often end up with the smallest slice of the pie, both in terms of wealth and actual power. They are given social praise called the backbone of society or the salt of the earth. But this praise rarely translates into systemic change or substantial financial and personal freedom. Questioning whether hard work alone is a valid formula for success can be deeply uncomfortable. It challenges a lifetime of programming. However, if you're chronically under-recognized and under-rewarded despite your best efforts, something more is at play than just personal misfortune. The mismatch between the ethical code of moral labor and the actual hierarchical structures is the issue. Once this mismatch is recognized, the dissatisfaction makes more sense. You begin to see that the system is not broken. It functions exactly as designed. It lifts up those who master power and often leaves behind those who cling solely to virtue as their operating strategy. Imagine the typical work environment. You have team meetings, performance reviews, official job descriptions, and subtle cultural norms. You might have a manager who emphasizes the importance of teamwork, fairness, and diligence. Yet when bonuses are distributed or promotions are decided, an entirely different set of criteria comes into play. Perhaps your manager hands opportunities to those they personally like, or to those who contribute to their own political advantage. Maybe it's the charismatic colleague who speaks up during every meeting, offers bold ideas, or cultivates connections outside of formal channels who gets noticed. While you meticulously follow each step of the process, double-checking data, being kind to every co-worker, and quietly excelling at your tasks, someone else is out there maneuvering themselves into situations where the big decisions are made. They are not necessarily better workers. They're strategic players who recognize that workplaces are governed by power politics as much as by skill sets. And this dynamic doesn't exist solely in corporate offices. It operates in schools, non-profits, hospitals, even religious institutions. In all these settings, the myth of moral labor still prevails. The belief that if you are the type of person who always says yes and does everything by the book, you'll be revered, promoted, or at least given job security. This belief is perpetuated by stories of the steadfast employee who remains loyal for decades and eventually gets recognized with a nice retirement package. However, in an era of rapid technological disruption, globalized markets, and volatile consumer trends, loyalty and perseverance do not necessarily translate into security. Companies can downsize with impunity. Organizations can merge and eliminate entire departments, and the higher-ups can shift investments overnight. All the while, those with cunning or strategic acumen know how to survive these upheavals. They foresee changes or have the phone numbers of decision-makers who give them an edge. They're not bound by the idea that the pure moral route, always working the hardest and never questioning leadership, will guarantee salvation. Instead, they actively question, bargain, and look for angles. This doesn't mean they are inherently unethical. Some might combine strong ethics with a strategic understanding of power. Others might be purely self-serving. Regardless, the common thread is that they operate in the space where power is recognized as the driver. This realization can leave those who embrace moral labor feeling disillusioned and exploited. Nobody wants to admit their entire worldview was curated to keep them compliant, but acknowledging that possibility opens doors. It's not a call to abandon moral principles, but rather to recognize that unwavering obedience by itself rarely shifts the balance of power. Nietzsche's insight is that glorifying self-sacrifice as the ultimate virtue blinds you to understanding how influence works and why certain people gain traction while others remain overlooked. If you remain stuck in the fantasy that the system is fair, you're easier to manage, easier to placate with small tokens of appreciation, and easier to replace when those at the top deem it necessary. To fully understand why so many of us cling to this myth, we have to consider how deeply comforting it is to believe in a fair world. Psychologists label it the just world fallacy. It's a defense mechanism allowing people to cope with daily injustices by believing the cosmic scales will inevitably balance. When something bad happens to someone, we might rationalize that they must have done something to deserve it. When we see someone who works tirelessly but lives in poverty, we assume they made poor decisions. It's unsettling to confront the reality that the world is often arbitrary and that massive inequalities exist with no immediate solution. This just world fallacy dovetails neatly with moral labor. By telling ourselves that if we keep following the rules and suffering quietly, eventually we'll be recognized, we can avoid facing the anxiety that perhaps we won't be. The notion that virtue is its own reward sounds honorable, and in some aspects of life, like personal relationships or community service, moral behavior can indeed bear meaningful fruit. However, in corporate or institutional settings that revolve around capital and power, moral labor does not always get transmuted into influence or financial success. That discrepancy is easiest to see in extreme examples. The nurse who attends to COVID-19 patients for exhausting shifts may receive applause from the balcony or get labeled a hero in a social media post, but their paycheck remains modest. Meanwhile, an online content creator selling get-rich-quick schemes might see millions rolling in from viral videos. That's not because society doesn't need nurses. It desperately does. It's because the systems that allocate money and influence care more about scale perception and market pull than about the moral worth of labor. Expanding on Nietzsche's concept, we realize there's a moral framework that not only encourages but praises the nurse for working under dire conditions without demanding more compensation. This framework lauds sacrifice service and duty as noble, but it rarely demands that the nurse or the worker in question also accumulate power, wealth, or leverage. After all, from the viewpoint of the powerful, there's nothing more convenient than an obedient workforce that's convinced their obedience is a noble moral path. If you find yourself feeling uneasy reading these words, that's part of the awakening. It's uncomfortable to recognize that the game might be rigged and that the deck is stacked in favor of those who accumulate resources and connections. Yet being disillusioned is the first step toward making a change. To be disillusioned is literally to be freed from illusions. If you've ever asked yourself, why am I not getting ahead when I'm doing everything right? It might be time to shift the question to, how can I understand and navigate power instead of just serving it? Understanding power dynamics doesn't make you a cynic, it makes you a realist. It's the difference between believing your boss will notice your hard work if you stay silent about your successes and taking active steps to negotiate for better compensation or opportunities. It's the difference between assuming your loyalty will be reciprocated and verifying whether you're in an environment that recognizes or merely exploits that loyalty. Ultimately, recognizing the truth about moral labor can lead to a more strategic, balanced approach to work and life. At this juncture, it's important to dispel a common misunderstanding. Nietzsche was not anti-work or anti-effort, nor was he encouraging everyone to become manipulative power seekers. Rather, he wanted to expose how moral systems, especially those rooted in humility and submission, can be shaped by people in power to serve their own ends. This is what he referred to as slave morality. Under slave morality, traits like meekness, obedience, and willingness to bear burdens become framed as the highest goods. If you believe wholeheartedly in those virtues, you're more inclined to follow orders, to remain content with minimal compensation, and to see your endurance as a personal badge of honor. In contemporary life, this translates into workplaces where employees practically brag about how many hours they've clocked without pay, or how they manage to juggle responsibilities without help. Instead of demanding better wages or more staff, they wear their exhaustion like a gold star. The tragedy is that these workers may see others being promoted for cultivating relationships with executives, for controlling narrative and perception, or for having specialized knowledge about how the organizational power structure truly operates. Yet the workers persist, convinced that if they just keep going, they'll earn their seat at the table. This phenomenon extends beyond the workplace. Think about social and political contexts. Volunteers exhaust themselves campaigning for candidates under the banner of civic duty, while the election winners might forget their names the next day. Non-profit staffers burn out in the name of a greater cause, while board members network with wealthy donors who direct the organization's future. So the pattern repeats: those who hold and understand power rise, while those who labor remain waiting for that elusive moral payoff. Nietzsche's critique remains incredibly relevant because it explains how entire societies can be lulled into docility by the promise that moral purity equates to eventual reward. He observed that what is praised as good in such systems often aligns with the interests of the ruling elites. For example, a religion or ideology that praises humility in the masses ensures that no one tries to topple the hierarchy. When the masses cling to the belief that the patient, long-suffering approach is inherently virtuous, they rarely organize effectively to demand structural changes. In essence, slave morality keeps people from questioning the fundamental legitimacy of the hierarchy. Instead, they question their own performance within that hierarchy. Why am I not doing better? Rather than, is there something inherently skewed in how this system rewards or punishes? This has profound implications for your own career, your sense of self-worth, and your pursuit of a happiness. If you're stuck believing that your moral fiber alone will be recognized, you may never try to learn the language of influence or the mechanics of negotiation. You remain locked in an unwinnable game whose rules were not designed to benefit you. Yet Nietzsche doesn't advocate that you abandon moral principles altogether. Instead, he suggests evolving beyond the morality that keeps you in chains. Doing so might be unsettling initially, because it requires you to acknowledge that the virtue you've been taught might be a mechanism of control. But once you cross that threshold, you can blend ethical intentions with strategic awareness. Here is where the conversation shifts from despair to empowerment. Recognizing that the system often rewards power over virtue should not lead to cynicism. Rather, it can spark a drive to reclaim a sense of authorship over your own life. You do not have to settle for a binary choice: either remain a moral laborer who is consistently undervalued, or become a ruthless operator who cares nothing for ethics. There is an alternative, a balanced stance that Nietzsche nudged us toward: become conscious of power while retaining a sense of personal and communal responsibility. To adopt this stance, you might begin with a mental inventory of where you stand, skills and value. Understand what you genuinely bring to the table: your technical skills, your interpersonal talents, your creativity, your unique experiences. These are assets that can be leveraged, not just humbly offered. Networks and connections. Reflect on who you know and how they can support you and who you can help in return. Building relationships is not merely politicking. It's a fundamental part of how human beings coordinate, collaborate, and grow. Self-advocacy practice. Articulating your achievements. If the system doesn't automatically reward your diligent work, ensure that the right people are aware of your contributions. This doesn't mean bragging or lying. It means refusing to let your successes go unnoticed. Boundaries and negotiation. Learn to say no when the job's demands are exploitative. Learn to negotiate for better pay, better hours, or more autonomy. Setting boundaries is not disloyal, it's self-respect. Long-term strategy. If you're in an environment that persistently undervalues you, plan an exit strategy or a pivot. Remaining stuck out of a sense of moral obligation or fear can keep you locked in a cycle of bitterness. If these steps sound radical, it's partly because many of us have never been taught to see them as virtuous. Traditional moral labor frame such actions, self-advocacy, negotiation, boundary setting as somewhat selfish or ungrateful. But Nietzsche would argue that this thinking originates from a system that benefits when people don't realize their own power. Moving away from naive submission is not a rejection of moral goodness. It's a rejection of the notion that morality requires a surrender of personal agency. This approach also questions why society glorifies those who sacrifice themselves for a cause without ensuring they have the necessary support or compensation. It calls out the hypocrisy of praising essential workers in times of crisis, but refusing to raise their wages or improve their working conditions afterward. It confronts the myth that working more hours is inherently superior to working smarter or more strategically. Paradoxically, by embracing a more strategic relationship to your labor, you might find it easier to do genuinely good work. When you're not resentful or burned out, you can channel your efforts more creatively. When you feel in control of your career trajectory, you're less likely to take out frustrations on others or lose sight of the bigger social good. As Nietzsche would emphasize, power and ethics are not mutually exclusive. In fact, your ability to effect positive change often hinges on how effectively you wield your personal power. Elon Musk is a modern figure often discussed in this context, sometimes admired, sometimes criticized, because he broke with traditional corporate structures to build something new on his own terms. Regardless of personal opinions about Musk, his story reveals a critical truth to change the world, or even to change your workplace. You cannot rely solely on hard work. You need vision, risk-taking strategic partnerships, and the confidence to walk away from situations that don't align with your goals. That mindset is not a departure from morality if your larger aim is constructive. It's a departure from the notion that morality is defined by humble suffering. In a sense, stepping beyond the cage of moral labor is the first step toward leadership. Real leadership does not merely do what is asked. It identifies what must be done and finds a way to accomplish it by any means ethically necessary. It's not about subservience to the status quo, but about rewriting the rules where they fail. To do this, you must unlearn the deeply ingrained notion that you need the system's approval for your contributions to matter. When you stop seeking permission, you open the door to self-directed projects, entrepreneurial ventures, or entrepreneurial roles within existing organizations. Sometimes this might involve forming your own team, rethinking your approach to business, or leveraging your expertise in new sectors. It can also mean simply renegotiating terms with your current employer. But all of these actions require stepping out of the comfort zone that moral labor can provide. Moral labor, after all, might feel safe. It fosters the illusion that if you stay good and do what's expected, you'll be protected. Unfortunately, that safety net is often torn away in times of crisis or when the bottom line demands cuts. The crucial aspect of this transformation is detaching your self-worth from external validation. If you've internalized the idea that you must always say yes to be considered a good worker, you'll find it difficult to assert yourself. You might fear that standing up for your interests makes you a troublemaker or a bad employee. But in truth, advocating for your value is not just an act of self-interest. It can also be a blueprint for healthier workplace standards and practices. When you assert boundaries and demand fair treatment, you help raise the bar for everyone else in similar positions. By re-envisioning morality to include self-respect, strategic thinking, and the responsible use of power, you do more than just escape the cycle of disappointment. you begin to shape an environment where ethical frameworks do not rely on blind submission. Instead, they revolve around informed, empowered individuals who can align moral values with tangible influence. Rather than giving all your energy to sustain a status quo that fails you, you redirect your efforts toward building, creating, and owning your future. Friedrich Nietzsche's exploration of morality is often misunderstood because his language can be provocative and his ideas unsettling. However, his critique offers remarkable clarity once you cut through the shock value and the archaic language of 19th century philosophy. He spoke of master morality and slave morality not as a simple condemnation of the latter, but as a way to show how moral concepts emerge from power dynamics. Master morality, in Nietzsche's view, is rooted in strength, creativity, and the capacity to shape one's reality. Slave morality emerges among those without power, who glorify traits like meekness and obedience to help them endure subjugation. When Nietzsche observed societies ancient to modern, he noticed that the moral codes celebrated by the masses often did not arise from the masses themselves in a vacuum. Instead, these codes were shaped at times deliberately by rulers, priests, and other influential figures to maintain their grip on power. The powerless, unable to challenge the rulers on equal terms, devised a morality that said in effect, we might not be strong or free, but we are good because we're humble and patient. Over centuries, these beliefs took on a sacred quality, so that questioning them seemed heretical. In modern workplaces, you can see shades of slave morality and the unspoken rules that say, never question the boss. Always go the extra mile, no matter the personal cost, or don't negotiate. Be grateful for what you have. These ideas might sound honorable on the surface. Who doesn't admire a team player or someone who is grateful? But when these beliefs are used to stifle legitimate concerns, underpay employees, or keep them in a perpetual state of anxiety, they become an instrument of control. Nietzsche would caution that slave morality is not synonymous with kindness or altruism. Genuine kindness, the compassion you might show to a friend, the empathy you feel towards someone in pain exists outside the realm of strategic moral structures. True compassion doesn't require you to be powerless. It's a human response that can flourish even when you hold influence. Slave morality, however, weaponizes the notion of goodness to elevate weakness or submission to a holy status. It discourages the powerless from aspiring to become powerful, framing that aspiration as morally suspect or arrogant. Moral labor, with its emphasis on endurance and blind loyalty, is a manifestation of slave morality in many aspects of modern life. It doesn't challenge the structure. It keeps you toiling within it, hoping for eventual recognition. When promotions or pay raises do come, they're often just enough to keep you content, not enough to truly shift your social or financial position. The real levers of power, the ability to change policy, redirect resources, or shape the future, remain with those who understand and engage with power as something to be managed, rather than meekly served. Recognizing these patterns in your own life can be uncomfortable. Nobody wants to admit that they might be trapped in a system that exploits their diligence and sense of duty. But as Nietzsche insisted, true awakening starts with seeing the structures that lie beneath moral ideals. By distinguishing between genuine ethical behavior and the manipulative constructs of slave morality, you gain the freedom to decide which values genuinely serve your well-being and which merely serve the status quo. To delve deeper, let's revisit Nietzsche's definition of master morality. Master morality doesn't automatically mean cruelty, tyranny, or domination. Instead, it's an approach to life that originates in a sense of self-confidence, creativity, and the capacity to author one's own values. Someone operating under master morality doesn't wait for permission to define what is good. They observe life, identify strengths, and claim them. For the masters, good might mean fostering innovation, resilience, or vision. Evil in their eyes would be stagnation, cowardice, or life-denying attitudes. In contrast, slave morality starts with a sense of powerlessness and responds by inverting the values of the strong. If the strong person is confident and bold, the powerless person frames that boldness as arrogance, and their own humility becomes virtue. If the strong person is decisive, the powerless person calls that tyranny while praising their own capacity to endure. Over time, these inverted values gain moral and even religious significance. People genuinely believe that being humble is higher than being assertive, not because humility in itself is always good, but because they've been conditioned to resist the dominant group. However, in modern times, we rarely speak of masters and slaves in literal terms. We do, though, talk about leadership and followership, about entrepreneurs versus employees, about influencers versus the influenced, about the wealthy elite versus the working masses. Even if the language has changed, the power imbalances remain. Those who understand the game can alter the rules or create entirely new games. Those who hold on to moral labor as their golden ticket keep playing by rules they never wrote, hoping for an outcome that the real authors never promised. It's crucial to see that Nietzsche never advocated that everyone should become a master in the simplistic sense of lording over others. Rather, he called upon individuals to evolve into a higher state, often referenced as the Übermensch or Overman. This was not a call to oppress, but a challenge to transcend the moralities that keep people subjugated. In this view, the Overman is someone who takes ownership of their creative power, who doesn't require external validation to know their worth, and who can engage with the world from a position of strength rather than perpetual victimhood or meekness. Applying this idea to our contemporary reality means understanding that you don't have to become a heartless CEO to embody master morality. You can remain kind, empathetic, and socially responsible, but you also cultivate a healthy sense of agency. You make decisions based on your personal values rather than waiting for institutional approval. You refuse to let your moral sense be twisted into an instrument of your own subjugation. In short, you bring your whole self, including both compassion and self-determination, to the table. Slave morality, by contrast, thrives on the assumption that the powerless must earn their right to exist by performing moral labor. You might recognize it in statements like, "I have to prove that I'm a good person by always going above and beyond," or "I must never question authority because that shows disrespect." These notions are particularly insidious because they tie your sense of self-worth to compliance. You internalize the system's judgments, believing that if you aren't rewarded, it must be because you aren't moral enough. The tragedy here is that people burn themselves out in the process. They accept punishing workloads or remain in toxic environments, all under the impression that perseverance is the highest virtue. Sacrificing personal time, family life, and mental well-being becomes a twisted badge of honor. When someone points out that this cycle is harmful, the immediate response might be defensive. But I'm proud to be a hard worker. It's who I am. Yes, hard work can be a wonderful characteristic, but when it's exploited by a system that has no intention of offering proportionate rewards, it transforms into a tool of oppression. Nietzsche would say that the key to breaking free is to question the underlying assumptions. Ask who benefits from my loyalty, who profits from my exhaustion, and why am I taught that quiet suffering is commendable? Often, the answer leads back to the people or institutions that stand to gain the most from your willingness to submit. Whether it's a massive corporation, a political group, or a social structure benefiting from cheap or free labor, your moral labor sustains their power while leaving you with platitudes. To be clear, Nietzsche was not discounting the genuine ethical imperatives of society, like empathy for the vulnerable or care for the community. Instead, he was showing that many moral lessons have ulterior motives. Slave morality elevates submission, not because submission is inherently virtuous, but because it helps preserve the power of those who authored that morality. Once you see that you're in a position to practice real ethics, helping others, or serving a worthy cause out of genuine goodwill, not out of unconscious obligation, and that shift changes everything. It makes your kindness an act of power rather than of submission. It turns your labor into a conscious choice instead of a forced duty. When you work with awareness, you set your own terms for how much you give and to whom. You also become more vigilant about your own needs, refusing to let others manipulate you under the guise of moral or spiritual righteousness. That vigilance can feel like a betrayal of the moral code you were raised with, but it's actually a step toward authenticity. As you begin to filter out manipulative moral expectations, you might discover new pathways for growth. Perhaps you realize you've been undervaluing your own expertise and decide to negotiate a better position or a higher salary. Perhaps you pivot careers altogether, leveraging your unique strengths in a setting that doesn't prey on your sense of duty. The point is, you reclaim the narrative, transforming from a passive participant in someone else's game to an active creator of your destiny. Now let's consider the so-called winners in this system, those who rise quickly, despite seemingly contributing less tangible work or less moral labor. It might be tempting to brand them as outright villains or cheats, but it's often more nuanced. Many of them recognize consciously or subconsciously that raw effort is not the primary currency. They grasp that relationships, image leverage, and strategic risk-taking hold more value in many organizational cultures than the hours spent at a desk. For instance, an influencer who posts a few videos a week that go viral can earn more in a month than a nurse makes in a year. This influencer isn't necessarily immoral. They've simply tapped into how markets reward social media, engagement, brand visibility, and mass appeal. The nurse, meanwhile, performs a far more critical job in terms of societal well-being, but healthcare systems and societal structures do not attribute comparable financial value to her moral labor. If this seems unjust, it's important to remember that it's not a glitch in the system. It's the system functioning according to its own priorities, which revolve around monetizing attention rather than rewarding essential work. In corporate settings, you might observe that the individual who invests time networking with upper management, securing endorsements, and showcasing partial successes can climb the ladder faster than the team member who quietly shoulders the burdens of major projects. Why? Because the currency of career advancement often involves visibility relationships and narratives of success. Hard data and long nights in the office may matter less if no one influential knows or cares. That said, some people manage to balance both moral labor and strategic prowess, creating a synergy that propels them forward. They work hard and ethically, but they also understand how to navigate power dynamics. They cultivate genuine connections with peers and superiors. They publicize their achievements without false humility, and they negotiate for what they deserve. This is an example of integrating moral behavior with a master morality perspective, where you recognize your own agency without discarding your sense of right and wrong. The cautionary tale is for those who do not integrate these strategies and remain in the dark about how real-world rewards are allocated. They can end up feeling bitter, blaming themselves for not working hard enough, or blaming others for having an advantage they call unfair. Nietzsche would point out that the notion of fairness itself is tricky. Was it fair to expect that moral labor would automatically lead to proportional rewards? Or was that a comforting lie designed to keep you motivated without threatening those who hold power? None of this is to claim you must abandon your integrity to succeed. On the contrary, you can keep your moral convictions and sense of justice, but you must also recognize the necessity of power. This means entering negotiations with confidence, building alliances with honesty, and not being naive about how decisions get made. Essentially, you cultivate the inner strength to be both good and shrewd, to act with empathy, while ensuring you're not taken advantage of. One might argue that this approach sounds like it demands constant vigilance, almost a paranoid stance that everything is about control. But there's a significant difference between paranoia and awareness. Paranoia is driven by fear, seeing threats in every shadow. Awareness, on the other hand, is driven by clarity. It allows you to engage with the world's complexities without succumbing to them. Nietzsche urged individuals to face reality, to let go of illusions, even if doing so is painful, because illusions keep you from self-realization. Once you accept that moral labor alone is not your salvation, you free yourself from the false comfort it provides. You stop seeking external validation for your virtue, and you start focusing on how to create real impact or real security for yourself and those you care about. This might lead to small but meaningful changes in your everyday life. Politely declining tasks that are outside your job scope, insisting on fair compensation for overtime, or carving out time to develop skills that will help you transition into a more advantageous role. These actions can feel revolutionary precisely because they go against the grain of slave morality. They might also invite criticism. People who still believe in the myth might call you selfish or difficult. Expect pushback from those who have grown comfortable exploiting your unending loyalty. They might question your commitment, your attitude, or your moral character. This is where Nietzsche's advice becomes particularly relevant. He encourages you to stand firm in your own self-defined values. If your moral compass tells you to be compassionate and fair, do so, but do it consciously, not reflexively as part of a system that's not serving you. Consider the powerful shift that occurs when you choose your path deliberately. Your work, rather than being an endless grind, becomes a strategic pursuit. Your social interactions, rather than being purely transactional or purely self-sacrificial balance. Mutual benefit with genuine empathy. You don't let cynicism consume you, but neither do you allow blind hope to chain you. You navigate complexities with a sense of agency. This is the crux of what Nietzsche meant by transcending beyond conventional morality. Moreover, you might find that by embracing this awakened perspective, you're better equipped to do genuine good in the world. Instead of being another exhausted worker, waiting for recognition, you might accumulate resources, build alliances, and create programs that help others break out of similar cycles. You're no longer trying to prove your moral worth to the system. You're using your power to reshape parts of the system in more equitable ways. In this sense, Nietzsche's critique is not an endorsement of ruthlessness, but a call to rise above illusions. He challenges you to become a creator of your life's meaning rather than a passive consumer of second-hand moral codes. It's a daunting challenge, but also an exhilarating one. Once you see how moral labor can be exploited, you can transform it into conscious, empowered action, still ethical, yet no longer naive. So how do you concretely implement Nietzsche's insights in everyday life? Start by clarifying your own sense of purpose and values, independent of external scripts. Make a list of your core principles, perhaps integrity, courage, creativity, or compassion. Then scrutinize how these principles intersect with your current work environment. Are you fulfilling your values, or are you sacrificing them because the system demands your silent endurance? Next, observe the power flows around you. Who holds influence? How do they wield it? Is it purely hierarchical, a boss-employee relationship? Or is it more distributed like a network of contacts and mentors? Sometimes just mapping out the connections and understanding who shapes policy can be illuminating. It reveals why some projects get the green light while others languish in obscurity. Then consider practical strategies, networking, and mentorship. Instead of seeing it as manipulative, view relationship building as a natural part of human collaboration. Seek mentors who understand your aspirations and respect your principles. Self-promotion. This needn't be boastful. Provide regular updates on your achievements and insights to key stakeholders. If you remain silent about your contributions, do not expect others to champion them for you. Boundary setting. Politely but firmly say no to unreasonable requests. Offer alternatives if necessary, but don't devalue your time and well-being. Skill investment. If you're stuck, consider training or education in areas that provide leverage. Perhaps learning about organizational behavior marketing or digital platforms. Knowledge itself can be a source of power. Strategic exit. If your environment shows no signs of improvement, or you sense that you will always be undervalued, plan an exit. This doesn't have to be impulsive. Develop a clear timeline and a strategy for transitioning elsewhere, maybe to a new company, maybe into self-employment. All of this requires a mindset shift. You cease to view hardship as inherently virtuous. You stop feeding the narrative that your suffering is your moral backbone. Instead, you see that moral backbone as something you carry with dignity, even when you decide it's time to fight for a better role or a different career path. Naturally, these changes are not always comfortable. They may trigger conflicts with colleagues who accuse you of changing or forgetting where you came from. You'll also battle internal doubts, especially if you were raised to believe that good things come exclusively to the self-sacrificing. As Nietzsche would remind us, transformation is rarely smooth. Yet the payoff is a life where your ethics are chosen, not imposed, where your efforts are acknowledged, not merely exploited. This kind of awakened moral stance also has ripple effects. You might become a leader who mentors others to break free from cycles of exploitation. You might collaborate with peers to change certain policies or introduce more equitable practices. When multiple individuals in a system adopt a more empowered moral orientation, the system itself can evolve to value sincerity and strategic alignment rather than unthinking compliance. Ultimately, Nietzsche's expose of slave morality is a catalyst for introspection and liberation. It implores you to ask whether your moral framework is uplifting you or binding you. For some, it's enough to realize that they've been playing by rules that don't serve them. This alone can be the spark for major life changes. For others, Nietzsche's ideas serve as a justification to create something new. Be it a business, a movement, or even an art form that reflects their authentic values rather than the values they inherited. The first step is recognizing that moral labor, the reflexive sacrifice of your time, health and well-being does not guarantee success, nor does it guarantee respect. If you're going to work hard, do it because you've consciously chosen a path that resonates with your personal mission. Understand the power structures in which you operate so that your labor becomes targeted and meaningful. Remember, moral labor itself is not a bad thing. It's the assumption that this labor alone must inevitably be rewarded that keeps so many people trapped. You might compare it to the dynamic between the nurse and the TikTok influencer. The nurse performs an undeniably valuable service, but is stuck within a healthcare system that equates moral labor with indefinite, often underpaid service. The influencer, meanwhile, comprehends the mechanics of attention and monetizes it, effectively reaping far greater financial returns. Neither person is necessarily more moral or more talented at the core. They're simply responding to different structures of reward. Yet you don't have to become an influencer or a market manipulator to find success. You only need to apply the principle that power flows where attention, resources, and decision-making converge. If you're an exceptional nurse, for example, you might pivot into healthcare, consulting policy, advocacy, or management, thereby positioning yourself closer to where pivotal decisions are made. That step demands the courage to shed the notion that merely being a good nurse guarantees advancement. All in all, Part 2 has illuminated how Nietzsche's concept of slave morality explains the persistence of the myth of moral labor. By exposing how deeply ingrained beliefs about suffering obedience and submission can be used to maintain power imbalances, Nietzsche provides a roadmap for escaping those illusions. Yet criticism alone isn't enough. The next logical phase is to harness your newfound clarity, apply it to your life, and begin integrating a more conscious, empowered approach to both work and personal development. This sets the stage for Part 3, where we'll delve deeper into how to practically merge ethical principles with an understanding of power. Rather than throwing moral values out the window, you can become the architect of a new moral code, one that doesn't exploit you, but empowers you, guiding you to a more authentic and rewarding existence. Once you've recognized the limitations of moral labor and begun questioning the roots of slave morality, the next challenge is charting a course forward. How do you retain the integrity and compassion you value without becoming a pawn for manipulative power structures? And how do you incorporate power into your life in a way that's constructive rather than exploitative? Nietzsche's answer lies in the concept of the Übermensch, or overman. This figure represents someone who transcends inherited moralities. He doesn't lazily adopt the ethics of his family, religion, or workplace. He shapes his own. Importantly, this shaping comes from a place of self-awareness and creative, well, not from petty self-interest. It's a call to become an individual who can hold both moral sentiment and strategic thinking in the same space. In practical terms, this means learning to see yourself as a creator of values rather than merely a consumer of them. For instance, if your workplace prizes a certain form of obedience that runs counter to your sense of fairness, you don't simply adapt and endure. Instead, you challenge or reject that norm. You decide it doesn't align with your personal moral code. This could manifest as lobbying for new policies, building alliances with like-minded colleagues, or ultimately deciding that your contributions will be better placed elsewhere. This might sound threatening to organizations that prefer complacent workers, but it can also be liberating for those who yearn to innovate. Think of a professional who, upon recognizing the exploitative aspects of their role, negotiates a new position that allows for ethical oversight or invests in a startup that aims to disrupt the industry. These are not acts of blind rebellion. They are deliberate decisions to rewrite the terms under which one works in alignment with a consciously chosen moral framework. At the heart of this process is the acceptance of power as neither inherently evil nor inherently good. Power is a tool like language or technology that can be used to heal or to harm. If your moral code includes values like compassion of fairness and respect for human dignity, then you can use power to uphold those values more effectively than if you remain powerless. As the saying goes, you can't pour from an empty cup. If your own resources, be they emotional, financial, or social, are depleted, you're limited in how much good you can do for others. It's critical to note that reclaiming power does not imply adopting ruthless tactics. You can, for instance, be transparent about your ambitions and form alliances with people who share your vision. You can ensure that your own ascent in a hierarchy does not come at the cost of trampling on co-workers' rights or dignity. In fact, genuine empowerment often lifts others up alongside you as it creates an environment where success isn't built on exploitation. This synergy is exactly what Nietzsche gestures toward when he speaks of self-creation rather than blind submission. Reclaiming power also involves redefining how you measure your own success. In the slave morality model, success might be narrowly viewed as external approval, a high performance rating, a title, a bonus, or a pat on the back from the higher-ups. But if these accolades fail to arrive, or if they do arrive, yet don't bring lasting fulfillment, you're left with a sense of emptiness. Meanwhile, if you look beyond that system, you can find new metrics. Did you achieve personal growth? Did your work align with your deeper values? Are you financially stable in a way that grants you freedom to choose your projects? A person truly living these principles might engage in moral labor, but only in contexts that match their chosen values. For instance, volunteering for a community project that genuinely resonates with your personal mission can be profoundly rewarding. You're giving your time and energy, not because you expect some official entity to grant you a certificate or a promotion, but because it aligns with your personal sense of ethics. This stands in stark contrast to overcommitting at a job that exploits your efforts without reciprocating. The difference is the element of choice and alignment. Financial stability is another important aspect of redefining morality. By acknowledging that power flows through resources, you can plan how to generate or sustain capital in ways that uphold your ethics. This might look like building a side hustle, investing in education, or partnering with others who share your moral vision to launch a venture. The critical shift is no longer seeing money as dirty, but as a means of amplifying the impact of your moral code. A telling example can be found in the experiences of many social entrepreneurs. They utilize business frameworks not merely for personal profit, but to address social or environmental issues. They blend moral labor and authentic desire to contribute to the greater good, with a strategic understanding of how markets, funding, and stakeholder relationships operate. The outcome initiatives that can challenge exploitative systems on their own terms, precisely because they wield sufficient power, financial, reputational, or technological, to make a difference. Of course, none of this is easy. It demands a willingness to unlearn long-held beliefs. If you grew up thinking that corporate loyalty would inevitably lead to a pension and a comfortable retirement, discovering the instability of modern employment can feel like a betrayal. If you believed that always being agreeable and accommodating was the key to being a good person, you'll likely struggle with feelings of guilt when you set a firm boundary or negotiate aggressively for better pay. Yet these struggles are signs of growth, the necessary friction that arises when evolving beyond the illusions that once governed your action. By reconditioning how you view labor and morality, you also begin to see opportunities in places you might have dismissed. Maybe you realize you don't need to do everything yourself. Perhaps you can delegate or collaborate. You start to network horizontally, connecting with peers to exchange knowledge and open doors for one another. In essence, you dismantle the hierarchical scripts that say you must wait for a superior to acknowledge your worth, and you create new networks of value on your own initiative. Another common misconception when applying Nietzsche's ideas is to assume that once you break free from slave morality, you must adopt a cold, self-interested worldview. But Nietzsche wasn't advocating that everyone become a self-absorbed tyrant. He questioned the notion that goodness equates to suffering and silence. A major step in reclaiming power is recognizing you can still be kind and cooperative while refusing to be trampled upon. Imagine you're part of a project team at work. In the old mindset, you might take on most of the responsibilities, never complain about workload imbalance, and quietly hope for praise. In the new mindset, you propose a fair distribution of tasks, ensure everyone is accountable, and speak openly if someone tries to offload their share onto you. You're still cooperative, but you're no longer sacrificial to the point of exploitation. Such actions can initially cause tension if team members are used to you always acquiescing. You might be labeled as difficult because you're no longer a passive moral laborer. This is where a strong sense of self-definition is key. By grounding yourself in the awareness that your ethical framework isn't about pleasing everyone, you can weather any backlash. You understand that maintaining a fair, respectful environment serves the team in the long run, even if it ruffles feathers in the short term. Stepping out of moral labor also allows you to use your energy more effectively. When you're not constantly drained by tasks that offer no real growth or reciprocity, you have the bandwidth for creative thinking. You may find yourself initiating new ideas that position you as a leader, even informally. Instead of playing the martyr, you become someone who sets boundaries yet contributes high-value work. This duality of strength and cooperation can be magnetic, inspiring others who are also tired of the status quo. Additionally, this shift helps you navigate interpersonal dynamics with greater clarity. You can show genuine empathy to those who are struggling because you're not bogged down by your own cycle of resentment. People sometimes assume that caring about power means adopting a Machiavellian approach. Yet it can also mean you have the sovereignty to engage authentically without manipulative or passive-aggressive behaviors that often accompany unacknowledged frustration. Over time, these changes can alter how you're perceived in your professional and personal circles. Instead of being the person who can be pressured into extra shifts or unrealistic deadlines, you become someone whose approval and involvement is valuable. That, ironically, can elevate your status, reduce burnout, and open avenues for growth, proving that you can indeed merge moral values with a strong personal stance. As you embrace this new orientation to labor and morality, a powerful question emerges. How do I enact change within a system that rewards cunning over contribution, perception over diligence? The first step is recognizing that you might not be able to overhaul the system immediately, especially if it's deeply entrenched. But you can influence your sphere, your department, your company, your circle of peers, or your community. The ripple effect of small pockets of empowered individuals can be surprisingly significant. One approach is to cultivate alliances with people who share your values and perspectives. This network can include mentors who've successfully navigated organizational politics, without sacrificing ethics, colleagues who have mastered boundary setting, or innovators pushing back against outdated norms. When like-minded individuals coordinate, they have a greater capacity to challenge toxic practices and propose alternatives. For example, suppose you and a group of co-workers are fed up with a workload distribution that punishes diligence. Together, you can present data-driven solutions, track the impact of inequitable practices, and advocate for reform. This collective action shifts the focus from individual complaints to systemic issues, making it harder for management to dismiss legitimate concerns. And if management remains unresponsive, a cohesive group has more negotiating power, possibly even exploring unionization or cooperative structures, depending on the legal framework. Simultaneously, you can look for opportunities within existing structures. Some large companies have channels for employee feedback or pilot programs for new ideas. Perhaps you can spearhead an initiative to address the exploitation of moral labor in your department. Or you might join committees dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion, using that platform to highlight how certain groups are systematically expected to do extra work for less reward. In parallel, remember that continuous learning remains vital. If you identify a gap in your skill set that leaves you dependent on exploitative systems, invest in closing it. This might mean technological upskilling, professional certifications, or leadership courses. While the old moral narrative told you that staying in your lane and working harder would eventually pay off, the new narrative says to work smarter to acquire the knowledge and tools that translate into real influence. It's also important to acknowledge that not every workplace is capable of reform. Some cultures are so entrenched in outdated values that your energy might be better spent elsewhere. Knowing when to leave isn't an admission of defeat. It's a declaration that your time and talent deserve a more conducive environment. Think of it as setting a higher personal standard. You're not running from adversity. You're choosing a battlefield where you can genuinely thrive. This mindset fosters resilience. When rejections or failures arise, they no longer crush you under the weight of a moral worldview that sees them as a cosmic punishment. Instead, you can view them strategically part of the process of finding or creating a space where your talents and ethics align. A central tenet in all of this is learning to trust yourself as an arbiter of value. Slave morality relies on the external system, bosses, institutions, cultural norms, to define what counts as good. Breaking free means reclaiming the authority to judge what is good for you and for those you care about. This shift is at the heart of Nietzsche's call to self-creation. However, it also demands you grapple with accountability. Once you claim the power to define your own moral framework, you can't simply blame the system when things go awry. Yes, systemic injustices are real, but your chosen path must include strategies to navigate or mitigate them. If you decide to start a venture that competes with established players, you need to be ready to handle obstacles in fundraising, marketing, community acceptance. If you choose to remain in a large organization and fight for change from within, you must acknowledge the risks. That's the essence of personal responsibility in Nietzsche's philosophy, freedom coupled with the willingness to bear consequences. By cultivating this stance, you also open the door to a more profound form of personal and collective ethics. Instead of obeying a moral code out of fear or tradition, you actively shape it. You think critically about how your actions affect others and how they reflect your self-defined principles. The result can be a morality that is far more robust and sincere than one dictated by rigid external rules. This brand of morality also allows for more nuanced collaboration. Imagine assembling a team of people who each bring their own self-defined moral outlook, but who share core values like respect, honesty, and a drive for mutual success. Their synergy can be extremely powerful because they aren't there just to follow orders. They're there to co-create something meaningful. Compare that to teams built on fear or forced compliance, which often collapse when their members lose faith in the leadership or burn out from exploitation. As these shifts take hold, you may find yourself more attuned to discrepancies in society. You start to see how certain professions like nursing, teaching, or manual labor are kept in a perpetual state of moral reverence but financial neglect. Meanwhile, industries focused on capital flow, public relations, or attention economics garner enormous wealth. Recognizing these systemic patterns can fuel your determination to either challenge them or navigate them wisely. To be clear, neither Nietzsche nor any conscious approach to morality can solve all social injustices single-handedly. But by starting with individual empowerment, you remove yourself from being a passive participant in your own oppression. You reclaim an element of choice in how you labor, for whom you labor, and why you labor. That empowerment, magnified across many individuals, can become a formidable force for broader change. Let's revisit the image of the exhausted worker who asks, "What did I do wrong?" That question might lead you down a spiral of self-doubt. Perhaps you didn't stay late enough. Perhaps you lacked some elusive quality. In reality, the more empowering question is, was I playing by rules that guaranteed I would lose? If the answer is yes, then your mistake was not a personal failing, but a misplaced faith in a moral system that was never designed to reward you equitably. The moment you recognize that you gain the freedom to change the narrative. Instead of lamenting the injustice, you can state, "I see the structure. I choose not to be bound by it. I'll learn the strategies necessary to navigate it or build my own alternative." Nietzsche's ultimate gift is this invitation to self-determination. He acknowledges that moral labor can become a prison if it's fueled by illusions. Yet by discarding those illusions, you open a path to genuine morality, one aligned with both your conscience and your practical needs. Here is where the concept of the overman once again becomes relevant. It's not that you stand on a pedestal above others, but that you stand apart from the forces that would dictate your values. In your work, this might mean refusing an unethical project, even if it means losing some short-term gain. It might mean pushing for transparency in your organization, even if it destabilizes comfortable norms. It could also mean rethinking the entire approach to your career, harnessing your creativity to forge a path that truly resonates with your sense of purpose. Yes, these decisions can come with costs. You might lose friendships or professional relationships based on transactional expectations. You might face financial uncertainty if you leave a stable but exploitative environment. You might face attacks on your character from those who feel threatened by your shift. But you also gain the unshakable ground of living in accordance with values you have examined and chosen. When you no longer rely on the system's pat on the head, you become resilient. Praise or condemnation from those who benefit from your subordination loses its sting. You might still appreciate recognition where it's deserved, but you're not starved for it. This independence can be jarring to people who have only known you as the good, compliant worker. But in the long run, it can earn you deeper respect from those who matter, and it can open doors to alliances with others who share your mindset. In stepping out of the cycle of moral labor, you don't merely become another opportunist. You become an individual, an agent in your own right, who can choose to do good on your own terms. That is the essence of Nietzsche's challenge to slave morality. Not to destroy the concept of goodness, but to free goodness from the shackles of forced submission. As we conclude this journey through the illusion of moral labor and Nietzsche's philosophical roadmap, remember that this process is both intellectual and deeply personal. It is intellectual in the sense that it requires you to analyze your assumptions about fairness, success, and virtue. It is personal because it invites you to examine your life choices, your experiences, your regrets, and your dreams. Part of the transformation involves rereading your own story. Instead of looking back at periods of overwork or exploitation with shame or confusion, you can see them as chapters where you learn the difference between myth and reality. Instead of berating yourself for not rising through the ranks, you can reinterpret those experiences as valuable lessons in how power operates. This reframing can free you from the bitterness that often accompanies disillusionment. Simultaneously, it provides clarity for moving forward. If moral labor alone doesn't guarantee recognition, you can invest your energy in strategic learning, networking, self-care, and creative projects that expand your horizons. You can also actively seek roles or environments that align more closely with your chosen moral code. And if such spaces are hard to find, you can band together with like-minded individuals to create them. In truth, you might still labor intensively, perhaps, even more than before, but now it's with a clear sense of direction rather than blind hope. You no longer idolize suffering as proof of your moral purity. You see effort as a vehicle for meaningful achievement. If you must toil, it will be toward goals you genuinely endorse, not the illusions the system handed you. As you embrace this perspective, you may also find new respect for Nietzsche's nuanced take on morality. He wasn't advocating chaos or nihilism. He was cautioning against moral frameworks that serve to entrench power differentials under the guise of virtue. By stepping into your own power, be it intellectual, financial, social, or creative, you can do more good than if you remain mired in moral illusions. The key is to differentiate between illusions that chain you and truths that liberate you. Ultimately, the question to ask yourself now is, what will I do with this knowledge? Will I continue to operate under a paradigm that equates moral labor with inevitable reward, or will I take the risk of reshaping my life based on a more accurate understanding of power and morality? It's a question that demands courage, because stepping off the beaten path means shedding the warm blanket of promises about someday. But it also offers the possibility of genuine fulfillment, the kind that comes from living authentically, forging your destiny, and contributing to the world on your own terms. Yes, the stakes can be high, but so are the rewards. The system's approval might be elusive, but self-approval rooted in a morality you've consciously carved out can be far more stable and far more satisfying. It anchors you through adversity, encourages creativity, and connects you with others who share your vision for a better, more equitable world. With that, we close this extensive reflection, having expanded the original insights by weaving Nietzsche's philosophy into the modern-day tapestry of work, power, and morality. Now it's up to you to internalize, critique, and apply these ideas. As you do, remember that the true measure of your moral stance isn't just how hard you work, it's how consciously you harness your power to shape a life and a society that aligns with your principles, and that is the real triumph over the lie of moral labor. If there's one thing we've learned on this journey, it's that recognizing the myths we grew up believing can be incredibly freeing. Accepting that hard work alone isn't always enough isn't a cause for despair. It's an invitation to reclaim your life on your own terms. When you begin to pair your strong work ethic with strategic thinking, clear boundaries, and authentic self-respect, you unlock a powerful new chapter full of potential and possibility. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Has this conversation changed how you view your own career or personal goals? Have you experienced the frustration of seeing others move ahead unfairly? Share your stories in the comments below. I genuinely look forward to hearing your perspectives. After all, life's richest lessons often come from sharing and learning from each other. Let's keep the conversation going and grow together, step by step. Thanks for joining us today. Remember, true success begins when you write your own story, not when you wait for someone else to recognize